number 5 from your worksheet 1, and you want to prove that all of this is equal to tangent squared. Again, the first step to any proof is pick the side you want to work with. Well, the left side's more complicated, so it's going to be easier to manipulate, so I would start with the left side. So you go ahead and rewrite what you have, so 1 minus cosine x, 1 plus cosine x, all over cosine squared of x. And we want to get that equal to tangent squared of x. So remember, we're only allowed to work with the left side because that's the side we chose to start with. Well, again, keep in mind your end result. I know tangent squared. If I can get this to be sine squared over cosine squared, I know that simplifies to tangent squared because that's one of my quotient identities. So I got to try to figure out some way to get this top to be sine squared. Well, it would be nice if I could just change it, but I don't know cosine of x because it's not squared. Same here. So you do the only thing you can on the top. The only thing I can do on the top is multiply these through. So when I do that, 1 times 1 is 1. And then you get plus cosine of x when you times that. Negative cosine x times 1 is negative cosine of x. And then negative cosine of x times cosine of x is negative cosine squared of x. And it's still all over cosine squared of x. So again, the reason I knew to do that was because it was the only thing I really could do, and I didn't want to change cosine squared because I know I want tangent squared at some point, and cosine squared's on the bottom. So then I go to do the next step. I know this and this are going to cancel out. So then I'm going to be left with 1 minus cosine squared over cosine squared of x. Now, this is again where you got to keep your end result in mind. I want to get to tangent squared. Remember, I know tangent squared is equal to sine over cosine. So I'm going to start with that. So I wish that I could get this to be sine squared. Well, now I have a cosine squared involved, so I know one of my trig identities might become in handy. So the one you need to know for this is sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1. So I could just replace the cosine, or if I rewrite this, I can rewrite it as sine squared of x equals 1, subtract that cosine over, so minus cosine squared of x. So I know 1 minus cosine squared of x, all of this, from when I rewrote it, is equal to sine squared. So then I can go ahead and write, hey, that's sine squared, because that was my identity, that's my Pythagorean identity, over cosine squared of x. Then sine squared over cosine squared, well, we know sine over cosine is tangent, so this will end up being tangent squared of x. And we got where we wanted to be. So we put a little box to say we're done with the proof and move on to the next problem. So number 6. All right. Again, first step to any proof. Choose the side you want to start with. I'm going to deal with the left side. I just like the left side. You could try it from the other sides. And remember, your proofs don't have to be exactly the same as mine. They can be slightly different as long as you're following algebra rules. So, again, I only have this side to mess with. I know I want to get to terms of tangent and sine. Well, I have cosine squared minus 1 and cosine. So, this one we just kind of have to play around with. So it's already in terms of cosine, but I know I'm going to need sine in there. So I kind of want to get these to be sine. I also see there's a cosine squared. Anytime you see one of the trig functions squared, you should automatically be on the lookout for one of your trig identities. So again, our main trig identity is sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1. Well, I have cosine squared x minus 1. So what I want to do is I want to solve this. So I'm going to minus 1, and then minus sine. I know just from that, when I solve this, I get cosine squared x minus 1 equals negative sine squared x. So this is a trig identity. It just rewrote the trig identity. So I know cosine squared x minus 1, that's equal to negative sine squared. So I'm going to replace the top with negative sine squared of x over cosine of x. Again, I know I want to get to this step. So I know I'm going to want a sine of x. And I know tangent is sine over cosine. So if I look at this, what I can do is split this up as negative sine of x times sine of x all over cosine of x. So I just split up the sine squared to show anything squared is itself, something times itself. Well, then I know, since it's multiplication, I can kind of split it up. Sine of x over cosine of x, that's equal to tangent. So I have negative tangent of x and then sine of x, which again is where I wanted to end. So put your little box, and that is how you prove it. So again, knowing your trig identities is probably the most important thing you can do.